A maid's daughter, desperate and crying, begged the police officer, "Please follow me home." But the seasoned officers were unprepared for the silent horror awaiting them. A 12-year-old girl ran into the light of the police station, her shadow long and thin behind her. She was crying, but her eyes were not weak. They were burning. She found the first officer she saw and grabbed his blue uniform, her small hands shaking violently. Officer Mike Wallace, a man whose face was lined from 20 years on the job, looked down. He had been halfway through a stale cup of coffee. The girl's voice was a desperate whisper. "Please," she begged. "Please follow me home." The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed. Officer Wallace put his coffee down. He saw the girl was barefoot. Her thin blonde hair was matted with sweat, even in the cold. "What's wrong, honey? Where are your shoes?" "There wasn't time," the girl said. Her name was Emily. "It's my mom. She's asleep. But she won't wake up." Another officer, Anna Riley, much younger than Wallace, stepped closer. She knelt to get on the girl's level. "Asleep?" Officer Riley asked gently. "Maybe she's just very tired." "No." Emily shook her head, tears flying from her face. "She's not tired. She's cold. I tried to shake her. I tried to put water on her face. Her eyes are open, but she won't see me." The girl's words hit the officers with a sudden, terrible weight. This was not a child who was lost. This was a child who was in charge. "And my little brother," Emily added, her voice cracking. "Ben, he's hiding. He's so hungry. He won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do." Officer Wallace looked at Riley. The casual boredom of the night shift was gone. He grabbed his keys from the desk. "Where's home, Emily?" he asked. "It's not far," she said, pulling at his hand. "The apartment's on Oak Street. Number 2B. Please, you have to hurry." "Oak Street," Wallace said to Riley. "That's the rundown block north of here. Call it in. Possible unattended medical emergency." He looked back at the girl. "All right, we'll follow you. But you're riding with us." Emily nodded. Her relief, so strong her knees almost buckled. Officer Riley helped her into the back of the patrol car. The girl was trembling, not just from cold, but from a fear so deep it had burned away all other thoughts. The ride took less than 3 minutes. The streets were dark. The car's headlights cut through the quiet neighborhood. Emily sat perfectly still in the back seat. She stared straight ahead. Officer Wallace watched her in the rearview mirror. "How old is your brother, Emily?" "He's 7, she replied, her voice flat. "And your mom? Has she been sick?" Emily hesitated. "She works all the time. She's a maid. For Mrs. Patterson, up in the big houses on the hill. She works until her hands bleed." The girl's words were sharp. They were too old for her. She didn't eat yesterday," Emily whispered. "She gave me and Ben the last of the bread. She said she wasn't hungry." Officer Riley turned in the front seat. "What about your dad?" Emily's face went blank. "Rick? He left. He left 3 days ago. He'll be back." Riley asked, though she already knew the answer. "He took the money from the jar," Emily said. "The money for the rent. And for Mom's medicine. He's not coming back." Officer Wallace gripped the steering wheel. He said nothing. He had heard this story 100 times. But it was different when the person telling it was 12 years old and barefoot. He pulled the car up to the curb in front of the Oak Street apartments. The building was old. Paint was peeling from the walls. One of the front windows was boarded up with plywood. "It's this way," Emily said. She was out of the car before Officer Riley could open the door for her. She ran up the cracked concrete steps and into the building. "Wallace, wait," Riley said, her hand on her sidearm. "This could be anything." "It's not a trap, Riley," Wallace said grimly. "It's worse." They followed Emily up 2 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled like old cooking oil and damp carpet. Emily pushed open the door to apartment 2B. It wasn't locked. The apartment was dark. The only light came from the street outside, filtering through a dirty window. The air was freezing. The heat was clearly off. "Mom," Emily called out. "I brought help." Officer Wallace reached for the light switch. He flipped it. Nothing happened. "The power's out," Emily said. "He didn't pay the bill." Officer Riley unclipped her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. It landed on a small, worn-out sofa. A woman was lying on it, twisted at an awkward angle. Her eyes were half open, staring at nothing. Her skin was a pale, waxy gray. She was thin, dangerously thin. "That's her," Emily said. "That's my mom, Susan." Officer Wallace went to the woman first. He put 2 fingers on her neck. He held them there for a long, silent moment. "She's alive," he said. His voice was tight. "Her pulse is weak. Very shallow. Riley, call for an ambulance." Now, while Riley stepped into the hall to get a signal on her radio, Wallace knelt. He looked at the woman, Susan. She looked 40, but she was probably closer to 30. Her life had been hard, and it showed. He saw a small, framed photo on the floor by the couch. He picked it up. It was a man in a crisp military uniform, holding a much younger Emily. The man looked proud. He looked strong. "Who is this?" Wallace asked, showing Emily the picture. "That's my grandpa," Emily said, her voice quiet. "Grandpa Thomas. Mom said he was a hero. In the war." Wallace stared at the uniform. He knew the insignia. He had worn a different version of it himself, many years ago. This man, Thomas, was not just a soldier. He was a decorated veteran. A legend, in some circles. A small sound came from the corner of the room. A tiny whimper. Wallace shined his light. In the corner, huddled behind a broken television, was a little boy. He was wrapped in a thin coat, holding his knees to his chest. It was Ben. "Hey there, partner," Wallace said, keeping his voice low and calm. "It's okay. We're the police. We're here to help you and your mom." Ben just stared, his eyes wide with terror. "He's hungry," Emily said. She walked over to the kitchen area. It was barely a kitchen, just a small sink and a countertop. She opened a cupboard door. Officer Wallace pointed his flashlight inside. The cupboard was completely bare. There was not a can of soup, not a box of crackers, not a single grain of rice. There was only a small, empty box of birthday candles. Wallace felt a cold anger rise in his chest. He turned his light to the small, rusted refrigerator. He opened it. The light inside was dead, of course. The shelves were empty, except for one item, a half-empty bottle of ketchup. "I tried to make soup," Emily said, her voice shaking, "with the ketchup and hot water. But the stove won't light. And Ben said it tasted bad." Officer Wallace had to close his eyes for a moment. He had seen shootings. He had seen car wrecks. He had seen the worst things one person could do to another. But this silent, cold apartment, with a decorated veteran's granddaughter trying to make soup from ketchup, this shocked him to his core. Officer Riley came back in, her face pale. "Ambulance is 10 minutes out." She saw the empty fridge. She saw the little boy. Her professional calm finally broke. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Get on your radio, Riley," Wallace ordered, his voice hard. "Tell dispatch we have 2 children, severe malnutrition. Tell them to send another car. And tell them to bring food. Whatever they have. Sandwiches. Milk. Anything." He turned back to Emily. The 12-year-old girl was standing straight, her hands clenched at her sides. She was trying to be brave, just like her grandfather in the picture. "You did good, Emily," Wallace said, his voice thick. "You did real good. You saved your family." Emily finally let out the breath she had been holding. Her shoulders slumped. The tears came again, but this time, they were different. They were not for fear. They were for exhaustion. She had done her part. She had run for help. And now, as the first sirens wailed in the distance, Emily finally let herself be a child. She collapsed into Officer Riley's arms, and for the first time in days, she let someone else be the strong one. The wail of the ambulance siren grew louder, a sharp sound cutting through the night. It stopped outside the building. Moments later, 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, hurried up the stairs with their gear. When they entered the apartment, they stopped, just as the officers had. The beam of Officer Riley's flashlight illuminated the scene. The gray-faced woman on the couch, the 2 small children huddled together, the bare cupboards. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The male paramedic, whose tag read David, said loudly to Susan. He knelt and began checking her vital signs, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around her thin arm. His partner, a woman named Chun, turned to the officers. "How long has she been like this?" "The daughter found her," Officer Wallace said. "She's been unresponsive for an unknown amount of time." Emily watched them work. Her fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Is she going to die?" Officer Riley put her arm around Emily's shoulders. "They are the best, honey. They're going to do everything they can for her." The second patrol car arrived. 2 more officers, Johnson and Peters, came up the stairs. They were not carrying flashlights. They were carrying 2 large brown paper bags from the all-night diner near the station. Officer Johnson, a large man with a kind face, saw the two children. He immediately handed the bags to Officer Riley. "We got 2 hot grilled cheese sandwiches," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and 2 milks, and some apple slices." Figured it was a start. Riley knelt in front of Ben, who was still hiding behind the broken TV. He had not moved. He was watching the paramedics work on his mother. "Ben," Riley said softly, "look what I have. It's a sandwich. It's warm." She unwrapped one of the sandwiches from its foil. The smell of melted cheese and toasted bread filled the cold, dark room. It was a smell of life. Ben's eyes locked on the food. He crept out, slowly, like a fawn. He took the sandwich with a trembling hand and bit into it. He ate like a starving animal, not chewing, just swallowing. "Slow down, buddy," Wallace said, his voice thick. He had to look away. "You'll make yourself sick." Emily took the other sandwich. She took one bite, and then she looked at her brother. Ben was already finished with his first half. Emily broke her own sandwich in 2 and held the larger piece out to him. "Here," she said. Ben took it without a word. "No, Emily," Officer Riley said, her eyes watering. "You eat. We can get more for Ben." "It's okay," Emily said. "He's smaller." Wallace turned away. He walked over to the small, particle board desk pushed into the corner. He shined his flashlight on it. He saw a stack of papers. They were bills. Red stamps. Final notice. Disconnection. Beside the bills was a checkbook. He opened it. The last check was written 3 days ago. To Rick Miller. The memo line just said "for food." The amount was $200. It was the last money in the account. "Rick," Wallace said under his breath. The name Emily had mentioned. He saw something else. A small, worn, leather-bound book. It was not a diary. He opened it. Inside, in neat, old-fashioned handwriting, was a name. Thomas J. Hayes. Below the name were notes. Dates. Places. Words that meant nothing to most people, but meant everything to Wallace. Unlock. Keysan. Hill 881. This was not just a book. It was a soldier's log. It was her grandfather's. "We're moving her," the paramedic named David called out. "Vital signs are unstable. Severe hypoglycemia. Dehydration. Possible hypothermia." They had Susan on a gurney. They were strapping her in. Her arm flopped lifelessly off the side. Ben saw it. "Mommy," he cried, the food forgotten. Emily ran forward. "Is she sleeping? Why won't she wake up?" "We're taking her to the hospital," Chun, the paramedic, said gently but firmly. "We're going to get her warm and give her medicine." "You did the right thing, calling for help." "I want to go with her," Emily said. Her voice was not a request. It was a demand. "We'll take you, Emily," Officer Wallace said. He put the leather logbook carefully back on the desk, next to the photo of the war hero. "You and Ben. We'll follow the ambulance. Officer Riley will stay here with you. I'm just going to secure the apartment." The paramedics wheeled Susan out the door. The other officers, Johnson and Peters, followed. Wallace, Riley, Emily, and Ben were left in the dark apartment. The silence was heavy. "What do you mean, secure?" Emily asked. She was smart. She missed nothing. Wallace looked at the door. The lock was broken. It had been kicked in. "Rick did that," Emily whispered, seeing where he was looking. "When he came back for the last of the money. Mom tried to stop him. He pushed her. She hit her head. On the counter." Wallace's blood ran cold. He shined his light on the counter. He saw a dark, brownish-red stain. "When was this?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "Yesterday," Emily said. "She was dizzy all day. Then she just went asleep on the couch. And she didn't get up." This changed everything. It was not just malnutrition. It was a possible head injury. An assault. "Riley," Wallace said, his voice all business. "Get on the radio. Tell the ambulance crew to check for a possible closed head injury. Tell them the ex-boyfriend, Rick Miller, is a person of interest." He turned to Emily. "This is very important. Where does Rick go? Where does he live?" "I don't know," Emily said, shrinking back. She was scared again. "He doesn't have a place. He hangs out at the bar. The one by the bus station. The Green Door, he calls it." "I know it," Wallace said. "Riley, you take the kids to the hospital. St. Jude's. Don't let them out of your sight. Go to the emergency room. Tell the front desk you are with Susan Hayes' children. I'll meet you there." "Where are you going?" Riley asked. "I'm going to go have a talk with Mr. Rick Miller," Wallace said. His face was a hard mask. "Mike, you can't," Riley said. "You're not on duty for that. We should call in detectives." It's a wellness check, Wallace said, his voice flat. I'm going to go check on his wellness. This man assaulted a woman and left 2 children to starve. He's not going to be gone by the time detectives get their coffee. He looked at Emily. He saw her grandfather in her eyes. That same stubborn strength. Emily, he said, your mother is a maid. You said for Mrs. Patterson. Do you know her first name? No, Emily said. Just Mrs. Patterson. On the hill. The big white house with the gates. Mom was supposed to work today. She never misses work. Mrs. Patterson will be mad. Let me worry about Mrs. Patterson, Wallace said. You just worry about your brother. And your mom. Go with Officer Riley. She will keep you safe. Emily nodded. She took Ben's hand. Ben had finished his milk and was holding the empty carton. My grandpa, Emily said, looking back at the picture on the floor. Can I bring him? Wallace walked over and picked up the framed photo. He handed it to her. You hold on to that, he said. Your grandpa was a good man. He'd be real proud of you tonight. Emily clutched the picture to her chest. It was the only thing in the apartment that mattered. Officer Riley led the 2 children out of the dark, cold apartment and down the stairs. The blue and red lights of her patrol car flashed against the building, promising safety. Officer Wallace stayed behind for a moment. He looked at the empty cupboards. The ketchup bottle. The disconnection notices. The stain on the counter. He was a cop. He was supposed to be objective. He was supposed to follow procedure. But as he stood there in the dark, he wasn't just a cop. He was a veteran. He was a father. And he was furious. He closed the door to 2B. He walked down the stairs, not to his patrol car, but to his personal, unmarked truck parked a block away. He was going to St. Jude's Hospital. But he was going to make one stop on the way. He was going to the Green Door. The Green Door Tavern was a low, windowless building tucked behind the bus station. It smelled of stale beer and regret. Officer Wallace pushed the door open. The sudden daylight from the street cut into the gloom. A few men sat at the bar, nursing afternoon drinks. A man in the back corner was playing a slot machine. The machine's cheerful, tinny music was the only sound, besides the low hum of a baseball game on a dusty television. Wallace's eyes scanned the room. He spotted his man. Rick Miller was at the slot machine. He was thin, with greasy brown hair and a jacket that was too big for him. He was feeding quarters into the machine, one after the other, his eyes glued to the spinning pictures. Wallace walked over. He stood just behind Rick. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. After a moment, Rick felt him. He tensed. He turned around slowly. When he saw the uniform, his face went sour. What? I ain't done nothing. Rick Miller, Wallace said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the bar's noise. The bartender looked up, then quickly looked away. Maybe, Rick said, trying to be tough. Who's asking? Officer Wallace. I need you to come with me. Come with you where? I'm busy, Rick said. He turned back to the machine. Wallace put one hand on Rick's shoulder. He didn't grab. He just rested it there. The weight was enough. You left Susan Hayes and her 2 children in a freezing apartment, Wallace said, his voice flat. You left them with no food and no power. You took her last $200. Rick tried to shrug the hand off. That's a lie. She gave me that money. Did she give you permission to push her? Wallace asked. Did she give you permission to make her hit her head on the counter? Rick froze. His face went pale. The hand on his shoulder suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Susan is at St. Jude's Hospital right now, Wallace said. She's not waking up. They're checking her for a brain bleed. That's aggravated assault, Rick. Maybe worse, if she doesn't make it. Rick started to sweat. It was an accident. She slipped. I was just leaving. Tell it to the detectives, Wallace said. He took his hand off Rick's shoulder and gestured to the door. Stand up. Put your hands behind your back. You're coming with me. Now. Rick looked around. The other men in the bar were watching him. His arrogance was gone. He was just a small, scared man. You can't do this, he whispered. I am doing it, Wallace said. Get up, or I will lift you up. Your choice. Rick stood up. He put his hands behind his back. Wallace was efficient. He cuffed him, checked him for weapons, and walked him out the front door into the bright, unforgiving light. He put Rick in the back of his truck to wait for a marked unit. You left kids, Wallace said, closing the door. Her kids. You left them to starve. They ain't my problem. Rick yelled from the back. Wallace just shook his head and called for a patrol car to transport him to the station. His work here was done. Now, he had to get to the hospital. At St. Jude's, the emergency room was bright and sterile. It smelled like bleach and coffee. Ben had fallen asleep on two chairs pushed together. Officer Riley had taken off her heavy police jacket and draped it over him. He was clutching the empty milk carton like a teddy bear. Emily sat beside him. She was awake. She had not blinked. She was staring at the double doors that led to the trauma rooms. She was still clutching the picture of her grandfather. Officer Riley sat across from her. She had been trying to make small talk, but Emily's answers were short. He was brave, Emily said suddenly. Riley looked up from her phone. What's that, honey? My grandpa. In the picture, Emily said. Mom said he got a medal. She said he ran into a fire to save 3 men. He sounds like a hero, Riley said. He wasn't scared, Emily said. Oh, I bet he was, Riley said gently. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you have to do, even when you are scared. Emily thought about that. She thought about running to the police station. Her feet still hurt. She had been terrified. A nurse with a kind, tired face and a name tag that said Patricia walked out from the double doors. She saw Officer Riley and walked over. Officer, she said in a low voice. Are you with the family of Susan Hayes? Emily was on her feet in an instant. Is she awake? Is my mom okay? Nurse Patricia gave her a sad smile. Your mom is very sick, honey. We're doing everything we can. We gave her medicine to help with her blood sugar, and we're warming her up. But she's not waking up the way we want her to. It's her head, isn't it? Emily asked. The words from Officer Wallace's radio call were burned into her mind. The nurse was surprised. Yes, it is. We're worried she has a bad bruise on her brain. We're taking her to get a special picture, called a CT scan, to see what's happening in there. A bruise on her brain? Emily's voice trembled. Can you fix it? We have very good doctors here, Patricia said. But we have to see what we're dealing with first. She's going to be here for a while. Just then, a man in a rumpled suit walked up. He had a gentle face, but serious eyes. He carried a clipboard. Officer Riley, he asked. Yes. This is Emily, Riley said. Emily, this is Mr. Henderson. I'm a social worker, he said. He knelt so he was on Emily's level. Emily, it's my job to make sure you and your brother are safe. And right now, you need a safe place to sleep tonight. Emily's whole body went rigid. I'm sleeping here. With my mom. I'm afraid you can't, sweetie, Mr. Henderson said softly. The room she's going to is for very sick people. No one can stay the night. No, Emily said, her voice rising. You can't take us. We're not going anywhere. Ben woke up from the noise. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, the police jacket falling off him. Emmy? What's wrong? He wants to take us away, Emily said. She grabbed Ben's hand. I don't want to take you away, Mr. Henderson said, trying to calm her. I just need to find you a warm bed. A foster home. Just for a little while, until your mom is better. No, Emily shouted. You're a stranger. I'm not going with you. People in the waiting room were starting to look. Officer Riley felt her heart breaking. The girl had been so strong, and now she was at her breaking point. Mr. Henderson, Riley said, can you give us just a minute? We're running out of time, he said, but he nodded and stepped back. Emily, Riley said, it's just for tonight. It's a place with food and a bed. It's a stranger's house, Emily said, tears welling in her eyes. She'll be all alone when she wakes up. She'll be scared. We have to be here. I'm afraid the girl is right, officer. Officer Riley turned. Officer Wallace was standing there. He had his hat in his hands. His face was grim. Sir, Riley said, standing up. Mr. Henderson, Wallace said, extending a hand to the social worker. Officer Mike Wallace. I appreciate you coming down. But they won't be going into the system tonight. Mr. Henderson looked confused. Officer, with respect, they have no legal guardian available. I have to place them. Wallace looked at Emily. He nodded at the picture in her hand. Who is that, Emily? My grandfather, she said, her voice suspicious. Thomas Hayes. Thomas J. Hayes, Wallace said. 3rd Infantry. Distinguished Service Cross. 2 Purple Hearts. Emily's jaw dropped. You knew him? I didn't know him, Wallace said. But I know of him. Everyone who served knows of him. He was a legend. He turned back to the social worker. There's a place. The VA runs a support home for veterans' families. My old commanding officer runs it. It's not a shelter. It's a home. They'll have a room for these two. As the granddaughter of a combat hero, she's entitled to it. Mr. Henderson was speechless. I don't know if that follows protocol. It follows my protocol, Wallace said, his voice firm. They are the relatives of a decorated veteran. They will not be put in a stranger's house. Not while I'm on watch. I'll sign for them. I will take them there myself. Mr. Henderson looked from Wallace's hard, determined face to Emily's hopeful one. He finally sighed and nodded. Okay, officer. For tonight. But we'll have to have a real meeting tomorrow. With my supervisor. That's fine, Wallace said. Tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight, they're safe. Emily felt a wave of relief so powerful, she almost sat down. She wouldn't be separated from her brother. Now, Wallace said to Riley, have we notified the mother's employer? Riley's face tightened. Yes. I found a number in Susan's phone. Mrs. Patterson. I left a message. She called back about 10 minutes ago. And? Wallace asked. And she's not happy, Riley said, lowering her voice. She said Susan missed her shift. She said, Sir, she said Susan stole from her a necklace. She said if Susan doesn't return it by tomorrow, she's pressing charges. Emily heard every word. Stole, Emily said, her voice shaking. My mom doesn't steal. She would never. Wallace looked at Riley. The situation had just become impossibly complicated. The woman who might have been ably a source of help was now an accuser. One fire at a time, Wallace muttered. He knelt in front of Emily. Emily, I don't believe your mom stole anything, he said. But we have to deal with this. Right now, my only job is to get you and Ben a hot meal and a safe bed. Can you trust me to do that? Emily looked at the big, tired cop. He knew her grandfather. He had gotten them food. He had arrested Rick. She nodded. Yes. Good girl, Wallace said. He stood up. Officer Riley, you stay here. Wait for news on the scan. I'll take the kids. I'll call you with the address. He held out his hand. Come on, Ben. Let's go, Emily. I think they have ice cream where we're going. Ben, who was now awake and scared, took his sister's hand. Emily took Officer Wallace's. They walked out of the hospital, a strange, temporary family, a tired cop and two brave, hungry children. But as they left, the shadow of Mrs. Patterson's accusation hung over them, a new, dark cloud in an already violent storm. Officer Wallace's truck was old, but it was warm. The heater hummed, pushing back the night's chill. Ben fell asleep again in the back seat, his small body finally giving in to exhaustion. Emily sat in the front passenger seat. She was quiet, her hands folded in her lap, the framed photo of her grandfather resting on top. She watched the city lights go by. They left the poor, dark streets of her neighborhood and climbed a hill. The houses here were nicer. The streetlights were all working, and the trees had been neatly trimmed. They pulled into the driveway of a large, older brick building. It looked like a small college dormitory or an old-fashioned hospital. A simple wooden sign near the door read, Hayes House, a haven for veterans and their families. Emily looked at the sign, then at her picture, then at Officer Wallace. Hayes House, she whispered. Like my grandpa? Wallace smiled, a small, tired smile. No, honey. It's named after a different Hayes. But it's a good coincidence, isn't it? I think your grandpa would have liked this place. He parked the truck and got out. He came around and opened Emily's door. He gently lifted a sleeping Ben from the back seat, cradling the small boy in his arms. Let's go inside, he said. The front doors opened into a room that was nothing like the police station or the hospital. It was warm, lit by soft yellow lamps. There was a fireplace, even though it wasn't lit, and comfortable-looking armchairs. It smelled like floor wax and chicken soup. A man in a wheelchair rolled out from a hallway. He was older than Wallace, with a stern face and sharp blue eyes. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans. He had no legs from the knee down. You're late, Mike, the man said. His voice was gravelly. I had to make a stop, Captain, Wallace said. He nodded toward Ben. This is Ben, and this is Emily. The man in the wheelchair looked at Emily. He looked at her bare feet, her matted blonde hair, and the fierce, exhausted way she held the picture frame. Well, the man said, his face softening just a little. You're not the first soldier's granddaughter to walk through that door with nothing but a picture. I'm George Morrison. This is my place. It's named Hayes House, Emily said, her voice small. My grandpa was Thomas Hayes. George Morrison's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Wallace, who nodded. Thomas J. Hayes? George asked. The real deal. The real deal, Wallace confirmed. George let out a low whistle. He rolled his chair closer and looked at Emily again, this time with a new respect. Well, I'll be. In that case, we're honored to have you, Emily. Your grandfather. He was the kind of man they don't make anymore. I know, Emily said. Martha, George called out over his shoulder. We've got 2 new arrivals. The kids I told you about. And find a pair of socks and shoes for the girl. A woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a kind bun and a floral apron, came bustling out of a kitchen. Oh, you poor things, she said, her voice all warmth. She immediately went to Emily and put a hand on her arm. You're freezing, and you must be starving. We ate, Emily said. The police gave us sandwiches. Sandwiches, Martha scoffed gently. That's not a meal. That's a snack. We have hot soup, and I just made a pan of cornbread. And we have milk. She looked at Ben, who was starting to stir in Wallace's arms. And for this little man, I think I have some chocolate pudding. Ben's eyes opened at the word pudding. He looked around, confused and scared. It's okay, Ben, Emily said, moving to his side. We're safe. This is a good place. Come on, Martha said, taking Emily's hand. Her hand was warm and soft. Let's get you 2 fed. Officer, you too. You look like you're running on fumes. I can't, Wallace said. I have to get back to the hospital. But I'd appreciate it if you could get them settled. We'll do more than that, George said. Martha will get them fed and cleaned up. We have a room for them. 2 beds. And a hot shower. Martha led the children away toward the kitchen. Emily looked back one last time at Officer Wallace. He gave her a nod. You're safe here, Emily. I promise. I'll call you when I know about your mom. Emily nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Wallace turned back to his old captain. Thanks, George. You're a lifesaver. Don't thank me, George said, rolling beside him toward the door. The girl's grandfather saved my life. Or his memory did, anyway. On a bad night in a place I'd rather forget, I remembered the story of what he did on Hill 881. It made me hold on for 1 more hour. An hour was all I needed. He looked at Wallace. That girl has his blood. She's a fighter. But she's terrified. She has a right to be, Wallace said. He told George the whole story. The apartment. The cold. The ketchup. Rick. The head injury. George's face grew darker with every word. And now, Wallace finished. The mother's boss is accusing her of stealing a necklace. Says she's pressing charges tomorrow. George let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. So the wolves are circling. They are, Wallace said. The mother, Susan, is in a bad way. The girl, Emily, is tough, but she's still a 12-year-old kid. And that little boy, he's seen too much. Don't you worry about them tonight, Mike, George said, his voice hard. No one is getting past me or Martha. You go to your police work. You go find the truth. We'll hold the line here. I know you will, Wallace said. He walked out of Hayes' house, leaving the warmth and the smell of soup behind. He got back in his truck and the cold night air hit him again. He put his head against the steering wheel for just 1 second. He was tired. He was so tired. He thought about the men in the bar. He thought about Rick Miller in the holding cell. He thought about Susan Hayes, fighting for her life. He thought about a 12-year-old girl, descended from a hero, who had to make ketchup soup for her brother. His phone buzzed. It was Officer Riley. He picked it up. Riley, what's the news? He listened. His face went grim. Okay. No, don't tell the girl. Not yet. I'm on my way. I'm going to stop by the station. Then I'm going to pay a visit to a Mrs. Patterson. He hung up the phone. He started the truck. He was no longer just a cop. He was a man on a mission. Officer Riley's words echoed in his head. The CT scan was bad. Susan Hayes had a severe subdural hematoma, a brain bleed. They were rushing her into emergency surgery. The surgeon had told Riley that her chances were 50-50ths. And that was if she was lucky. Officer Wallace drove his truck through the night. He was heading uphill, toward the part of town where the streetlights were brighter and the lawns were manicured. The Patterson house. He was tired. His shift had ended hours ago. He was running on anger and the stale coffee from the hospital vending machine. He thought about Susan Hayes, lying on an operating table under bright, sterile lights. He thought about Rick Miller, sleeping off his arrogance in a holding cell. He thought about Emily, holding that picture of her grandfather, a man who represented a kind of honor that seemed to be in short supply tonight. Theft. The word felt wrong. It didn't fit. A woman who would starve herself to give her children the last piece of bread was not a woman who stole jewelry. A woman who tried to make soup from a ketchup bottle was desperate, yes. But Wallace had seen real thieves. Their desperation looked different. It was selfish. Whatever Emily and Susan had, they had each other. Thieves had only themselves. He pulled up to a high, wrought iron gate. A security camera with a small red light pointed at him. He buzzed the intercom. A woman's voice, crisp and sharp, came through the speaker. "Yes, ma'am, this is Officer Mike Wallace. I'm here regarding your employee, Susan Hayes." There was a pause. "It's nearly 11 o'clock, officer." "I know, ma'am," Wallace said, his voice flat. "It's an emergency. Susan is in the hospital. She's in critical condition." The speaker clicked. The heavy iron gate buzzed and slowly swung open. Wallace drove up a long, curving driveway. The house was, as Emily had described, enormous. It was a white colonial, with tall pillars and a porch that was bigger than Susan's entire apartment. Every window was lit. It looked like a picture in a magazine. It was perfect, and it was cold. A woman was waiting for him at the door. She was in her late 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair. She wore a silk dressing gown and a stern expression. This was Eleanor Patterson. "Officer," she said, holding the door open just enough for him to enter. "This is highly irregular." The entryway was vast. The floor was black and white marble. A crystal chandelier hung from the two-story ceiling. There was no clutter. No coats on a chair, no mail on a table. It was a house, but it was not a home. "Mrs. Patterson," Wallace said, holding his hat in his hands. "I'll be brief. I'm here about the statement you made. The one about the stolen necklace." "Yes," Eleanor said, crossing her arms. "I intend to press charges in the morning. I told your dispatcher. My lawyer will be handling it." "Well, that's going to be difficult," Wallace said. "Difficult? What?" "Because Susan Hayes is currently in emergency brain surgery at St. Jude's. She has a severe subdural hematoma. She's unconscious." Eleanor Patterson's composure finally broke. Her hand went to her throat. "What? Surgery? I don't understand." "Her ex-boyfriend assaulted her," Wallace said. He watched her face. He pushed her. She hit her head. She's been lying on her sofa, unresponsive, for over a day. "A day?" Eleanor looked confused. "But she was here yesterday morning. She cleaned." "No, ma'am," Wallace said. "She was not. Her 12-year-old daughter found her. The girl ran barefoot to my station tonight because her mother wouldn't wake up. When we arrived, the power was out. The heat was off. There was no food in the apartment. At all." He let the words hang in the vast, silent hall. Eleanor actually took a step back. She steadied herself on a polished wooden table. "No food? That's dreadful. I had no idea." She was desperate, Wallace said, pressing the point. "But that doesn't make her a thief." "But the necklace," Eleanor insisted, her mind trying to hold on to her own story. "It's gone. It was in my jewelry box. A diamond and sapphire necklace. My grandmother's. It was there when I went to bed 2 nights ago. Susan was here yesterday, and today it's gone." "You said she was here yesterday, but I'm telling you, she was not." "She must have been," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "My bedroom, it was cleaned. The bed was made. The floors were polished. She always comes on Tuesdays." "Who else has a key to this house, Mrs. Patterson?" Wallace asked. "No one," she said. "Just the staff. But they weren't here. And my son, your son, William," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "But he's at his university. He's in Boston." "Are you sure?" Wallace asked. Eleanor's perfect poise was crumbling. Her eyes darted away toward the grand staircase. "He's been having some trouble with his classes. He needed money. Last week." "Ma'am, may I see the room? The one Susan supposedly cleaned?" Eleanor hesitated. She was a private woman, but the look in the officer's eyes told her this was not a request. She nodded. "It's this way." She led him up the sweeping, carpeted staircase. They walked down a hall lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors. She opened a set of double doors. The bedroom was immaculate. It was larger than Wallace's entire first floor. A large, 4-poster bed was made with military precision. The carpet had fresh vacuum lines. "You see," Eleanor said. "Cleaned. She must have been here." Wallace walked into the room. He wasn't a detective. He was a beat cop, but he had good instincts. He looked at the polished furniture. He looked at the large, mahogany jewelry box on the dresser. It was open, and it was clearly missing a prominent item. "She always polishes the silver frames," Eleanor said. pointing to a collection of photos on her desk. She's very thorough. Wallace walked over to the desk. He looked at the frames. They were gleaming. He looked at the rest of the room. It was spotless. Too spotless. Your son, William, Wallace said. Does he know how to clean? Eleanor looked offended. What? Of course not. We have staff for that. What? Because this isn't Susan's work, Wallace said. How could you possibly know that? Wallace pointed to a small, ornamental trash bin next to the desk. It was lined with a plastic bag. Inside, there was a single item. A crumpled, waxy-looking towelette. Wallace leaned down, using a pen from his pocket to fish it out. He held it up. It was a pre-packaged lemon-scented dusting wipe. The kind you buy at a gas station. Your maid, Mrs. Patterson, Wallace said. A woman who, according to her daughter, works until her hands bleed. Does she use disposable dusting wipes? Eleanor frowned. No. She brings her own supplies. Rags. Bottles of polish. Wood cleaner. She says these are wasteful. And they leave a residue. Exactly, Wallace said. This is a lazy job. This is someone trying to look like they cleaned. Someone who wanted to cover their tracks. Someone who came in, made the bed, wiped a few surfaces, and what? He looked at the jewelry box. And stole a necklace. A necklace he knew he could sell quickly. A son with a money problem. Eleanor Patterson sank onto the edge of her perfectly made bed. Her face was white. Willie, she whispered. He was here. I thought I heard the door last night. I thought I was dreaming. He has a gambling problem. I cut him off. I told him not to come back until he was clean. She looked up at Wallace. The hard, silver shell was gone. She was just an old woman. A mother who had been betrayed. I accused her, she whispered, her voice full of a sudden, terrible shame. I accused that poor woman. Susan. I was so sure. It was easier to believe it was her. The maid, than my own son. You need to fix this, Mrs. Patterson, Wallace said. His voice was not kind, but it was not cruel. It was the voice of fact. You need to call the station. Tonight. You need to retract your statement. You have accused an innocent woman. A woman who is currently on an operating table, fighting for her life. Yes, Eleanor said, nodding, her eyes blurred with tears. Of course. I'll call them right now. I'll tell them it was William. Oh God. What have I done? You can fix that part, Wallace said, turning to leave. But you need to understand something. He stopped at the door. Those children, he said. Emily and Ben. They are the grandchildren of a man named Thomas J. Hayes. A war hero. They come from good, strong stock. And they've been left with nothing. Their mother may not. She may not make it. And you were about to make her a criminal. That would have cost those children everything. Eleanor flinched as if he had struck her. You called the station, ma'am, Wallace said. He put his hat back on his head. I have to get back to the hospital. He walked out of the pristine, cold mansion. He left Eleanor Patterson alone in her son's manufactured clean room, holding a cheap lemon-scented wipe. He had solved the mystery of the necklace. He had cleared Susan's name. But as he got in his truck, he felt no victory. He just felt an overwhelming sadness. He drove back down the hill, from the world of false accusations and easy blame, to the world of hard truth and real consequences. He had to go see if Susan Hayes was still alive. The lights of St. Jude's Hospital felt too bright. They made the gray floors and pale green walls seem even more sterile. Officer Wallace walked back into the emergency room waiting area. It was past midnight now. The room was mostly empty. Officer Riley was asleep in a chair, her head tilted back at an awkward angle, her jacket still draped over the chairs where Ben had been. Wallace gently touched her shoulder. Riley, wake up. She startled awake, instantly alert. Sir? What happened? The kids? The kids are safe, Wallace said, his voice low. They're at Hayes' house. With George Morrison. They're fed. They're warm. And Mrs. Patterson? Riley asked, rubbing her eyes. The theft? There was no theft, Wallace said. It was the son. He stole the necklace. Mrs. Patterson was covering for him. She's retracting her statement. Susan's name is clear. Riley let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Oh, thank God. That's one good thing. Any word from surgery? Wallace asked, looking at the double doors. Nothing, Riley said. It feels like forever. The surgeon said he'd come out as soon as he knew. As if summoned by his words, the double doors swung open. A man in blue surgical scrubs, a mask hanging around his neck, walked out. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at the two police officers. Are you here for Susan Hayes? Wallace and Riley both stood up. Yes, doctor. How is she? The surgeon, a man named Dr. Patel, rubbed his face. She is a very, very lucky woman. The hematoma was severe. The pressure on her brain was significant. A few more hours, and we would be having a very different conversation. But, Wallace pressed, his heart in his throat. But the surgery was successful, Dr. Patel said. We were able to relieve the pressure. We stopped the bleeding. Her vital signs are stable. So she's going to be okay? Riley asked. She's alive, Dr. Patel corrected gently. She is in a medically induced coma. We need to keep the brain swelling down. The next 48 hours are critical. But she's alive. She has a chance. A good one. He looked at the two cops. That woman, she's a fighter. Malnourished, dehydrated, with a head injury. She held on. She must have had a reason to. Wallace thought of Emily and Ben. She did, doctor. She has too. Well, she's in the surgical ICU now. No visitors yet. We'll know more in the morning. Dr. Patel nodded and walked away, his work done. Wallace leaned against the wall. The exhaustion he had been fighting finally hit him. He pulled out his phone. I have to make a call, he said. At Hayes' house, the lights were dim. But in the kitchen, a single light was on. Emily was sitting at the big wooden table. She hadn't been able to sleep. Martha, the kind woman with the apron, was sitting with her, not talking, just being there. The phone on the wall rang. It was loud in the quiet house. Martha picked it up. Hayes' house. She listened. Yes, officer. She's right here. She held the phone out to Emily. It's for you, dear. It's Officer Wallace. Emily's hands were shaking so hard she could barely take the phone. She pressed it to her ear. Officer, she whispered. Emily. Wallace's voice came through the line. It was deep and tired, but it was calm. I have news about your mom. Emily closed her eyes. She gripped the phone. Is she? The doctor just came out, Wallace said. The operation went well. They fixed the hurt in her head. She's sleeping now. A very deep sleep, so her brain can heal. But, Emily, she's going to be okay. Emily's knees gave out. She slid down from the chair and sat on the floor, leaning against the kitchen cabinet. She was still holding the phone. A sound came out of her. It was not a cry. It was not a sob. It was the sound of a 12-year-old girl who had been holding the entire world on her shoulders for 3 days. It was the sound of all that fear, all that cold, and all that loneliness finally breaking apart. Martha was instantly on the floor with her, her arms around the small, trembling girl. She's okay. Emily whispered into Martha's shoulder. She's okay. My mom is okay. I know, child, Martha said, rocking her. I know. You did it. You saved her. On the other end of the line, Officer Wallace listened for a moment. He heard Martha's comforting voice. He heard the child's tears of relief. I'll see you in the morning, Emily, he said softly, and hung up. He drove home as the first hint of gray light touched the sky. He had never been more tired, and he had never felt more like a cop. The next morning, Emily woke up in a bed that was not hers. It was warm. The blankets were heavy. Sunlight was streaming through a clean window. For one terrible second, she didn't know where she was. Then she smelled it. Bacon. And coffee. She sat up. Ben was still asleep in the bed across the room, his face peaceful for the first time in memory. She put her feet down, not on cold, hard linoleum, but on a soft, woven rug. At the foot of her bed, someone had left a pair of white socks and a pair of new-looking sneakers. She walked out into the hall. She followed the smell to the dining room. George Morrison was at the head of a long table, reading a newspaper. Morning, soldier, he said, not looking up. Sleep well. Yes, sir, Emily said. Good. Martha made pancakes. Grab a plate. Emily sat down. It was all so normal. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt. Just as she was taking her first bite, the front door opened. Officer Wallace came in. He looked tired, but he was in a fresh uniform. With him was a woman Emily had never seen. It was Eleanor Patterson. Eleanor looked different than she had in her grand, cold house. She was wearing a simple dress. Her hair was not perfect. Her eyes were red, as if she had not slept. She looked at Emily. Her face was full of a complicated shame. Mrs. Patterson, George said from the end of the table. His voice was polite, but cold as iron. To what do we owe the honor? I came to see the children, Eleanor said. She was holding a large envelope in her hands. "Emily," she said, walking toward the table. I am Mrs. Patterson. Your mother. Your mother worked for me." Emily put her fork down. She looked at this woman. This was the woman who had hurt her mother. "You said my mom stole from you," Emily said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. Eleanor flinched. "Yes, I did. And I was wrong. I was so very wrong, Emily. The person who stole from me was my own son. I was angry, and I was hurt, and I blamed the easiest person. I blamed your mother. And I will never, ever be able to tell you how sorry I am for that." She was crying now. Real tears. "I have already called the police and fixed my statement," she said. "But that is not enough. I spoke to the hospital. I have taken care of all of your mother's medical bills. All of them." She placed the envelope on the table. "And this is for you. And for Ben. It's a trust. For your education. For a new apartment. For whatever you need. It is not charity, Emily. It is an apology. It is what I owe your mother for my terrible mistake." Emily just stared at her. "Your mother," Eleanor continued, her voice thick, "is a good woman. She is an honest woman. And I failed her. And I failed you." Emily looked at the envelope. She looked at Officer Wallace. She looked at George. Then she looked back at Eleanor Patterson. "My mom. She's a maid," Emily said. "She's not a manager." Eleanor shook her head. "No. When she is well, I have a job for her. As my house manager. With a real salary. And health insurance. And a guest house on the property, if she wants it. She will never have to choose between her medicine and her rent again." It was a new life. A complete, total, new life. Emily stood up. She walked over to Eleanor Patterson. The rich, silver-haired woman looked down at the 12-year-old girl in borrowed clothes. "My grandpa," Emily said, "always said you can't fix what's broke, but you can build something new." She paused. I accept your apology." Eleanor Patterson let out a sob, and she did something she probably had not done in years. She hugged the small girl. She held on to her, as if Emily was the one holding her up. Officer Wallace watched. He saw George Morrison wipe a single tear from his eye. This was it. This was justice. It wasn't clean. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. 3 days passed. 3 days of Susan Hayes sleeping in the quiet, beeping world of the intensive care unit. The swelling in her brain went down. The doctors slowly, carefully, reduced the medicine that was keeping her in the coma. Officer Wallace, George, and Martha made sure the children were never alone. They ate at Hayes' house. They did homework. They slept in their warm beds. But every day, Martha would drive Emily and Ben to the hospital. They would sit by their mother's bed. Emily would hold her hand and talk. She told her about running to the police. She told her about Officer Wallace and Officer Riley. She told her about the warm sandwiches and the milk. She told her about Hayes' house, and George in his wheelchair, and Martha's pancakes. "You just have to wake up, Mom," Emily whispered, squeezing her hand. "Ben misses you. I miss you." On the 4th morning, Emily was sitting in her usual chair, watching her mother's still face. Ben was quietly coloring in a book on the floor. A nurse came in and smiled. "She's been stirring. Her vitals are strong. I think she's close." Emily sat up, her heart pounding. She watched. Susan's eyelids fluttered. A small sound, a groan, came from her throat. "Mom," Emily said, standing up, moving to the bedside. Susan's head turned on the pillow. Her eyes opened. They were blurry, confused. She saw the white ceiling. She saw the metal rail of the bed. She saw the 4-tube in her arm. A look of panic crossed her face. "Mom," Emily said louder. "It's me. It's Emily. You're safe." Susan's eyes tried to focus. They found Emily's face. The panic slowly faded. Recognition dawned, like a light coming on in a dark room. "Emmy." The word was a dry, cracked whisper. It was the most beautiful sound Emily had ever heard. "I'm here, Mom." Emily started to cry, tears of pure relief. "I'm here. You're in the hospital. You were sick. But you're okay. You're going to be okay." "Ben?" Susan whispered, her eyes searching. "I'm here, Mommy." Ben dropped his crayons and scrambled up to the bed, careful of the wires. He buried his face in her blanket. Susan tried to lift her hand. It felt like it was made of lead. She could only move her fingers. Emily gently took her mother's hand and placed it on Ben's blonde hair. Tears rolled down Susan's temples and into her hair. She was so weak. But she was here. And her children were here. She looked at them, really looked at them. They were clean. Their clothes were new. Ben's cheeks were full. They were not hungry. They were not cold. How? She managed to whisper. I ran, Emily said, her voice shaking with pride. I ran for help. And they came. The police. Officer Wallace. They helped us. They saved us. Susan's eyes drifted to the doorway. Officer Wallace was standing there. He had been there the whole time. He saw the family, broken and freezing in that dark apartment, now whole again in the bright, warm sunlight of the hospital room. He gave Susan a small, respectful nod. Susan looked back at her daughter, her brave, 12-year-old girl. My hero, Susan whispered. She closed her eyes. Not in a coma, not in a faint, but in the first true, healing sleep she had known in years. She was safe. Her children were safe. She could finally rest. 1 month later, the hospital room was bright. Susan Hayes was sitting up in bed. She was still thin, and her hair had been shaved on one side for the surgery, but her eyes were bright. Her skin was no longer gray. She was laughing. Ben was on the bed with her, showing her a drawing he had made. Emily sat in a chair beside her, reading a book. The door opened. Officer Wallace and George Morrison came in. Well, look at you, Wallace said, smiling. You look 100 times better, Susan. I feel it, officer, Susan said. Her voice was stronger now. Thanks to you. And to everyone. Emily did the hard part, Wallace said. We just drove. George rolled his chair up to the bed. He was holding something. Emily, he said, we had something made for you. To replace the one that got damaged. He handed her a new, beautiful wooden frame. Inside it was the picture of her grandfather, Thomas J. Hayes. The glass was clean. The frame was strong. On a small brass plaque at the bottom, it said, like grandfather, like granddaughter. True valor. Emily took it. She held it. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She just looked at Officer Wallace. Thank you, she whispered. Wallace just nodded. He left the hospital that day and stood for a moment on the curb. He thought about that night. It felt like a lifetime ago. He thought about the nature of a hero. Sometimes, a hero was a man who ran into a fire on a hill in a foreign country. Sometimes, it was a 12-year-old girl, barefoot and terrified, running toward a light in the darkness, pulling the future behind her. And sometimes, a hero was just a cop, tired and heartsick, who heard a little girl cry, "Please follow me home." And he did. And that's our story for now. My goal is always to give you a little escape, a chance to just breathe. I'm always curious, what's your setup? Are you relaxing with a cup of tea, on a commute, or winding down for the night? Drop a line in the comments. I love reading them. If you enjoyed this and want to catch the next one, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. We also value your feedback, so feel free to share your thoughts. Thank you for being here.